I'm very curious on what the impressions are of the anime-onlys after this episode of Drifters, because the enemies of this story so far might intrigue a lot. If you know a lot about your history, and if you know a lot about certain set characters that were displayed in this episode, this probably got your interest. But also, the final villain, the main villain of the ends, as you can see, the Black King. And I just want to point out a couple of details about him, which was displayed in this episode, so it's not a spoiler. I'm just going to throw it on out there. The Black King wears this big robe. We don't see his face. He has a big staff, and if you look really closely, the way the designs are, the flags and stuff like that throughout this episode, you see a crucifixion cross. You see this man that is supposedly someone that doesn't like humans. But on top of that, you have it to where this man has a hole in his hand. Now, if you know anything about the Bible and stuff like that, you might instantly key on who this might be. Now, I'm not going to say who it is, because I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm just going to say right now, what's everybody's impressions on what you think the main villain of this series is after those little details that this episode gave us? Now, looking past that, let's look at the other characters, like Jonah of the Ark, okay? So this character, in history, she was actually a good person. She was actually supposed to be a good person. But if you know her history, in the conclusion of her history, you know she was burned at the stake. She died, thanks to fire, and everybody turned on her. She died. And if you think about the consequences of that, you can kind of see why she might be evil in this regard. I mean, if you got burned at the stake after being such a good person your entire life and all that, and everybody betrays you, you might turn into an asshole, or an evil person. And so seeing that, it makes sense if you know the history of Jonah of the Ark. And then if we look at other characters like Anastasia, now I'm not going to say who's the person behind her. If you know your history about Anastasia, you probably already know who that is. But we got Anastasia as well, and then we have other characters too alongside that, even people from World War that was introduced in this episode. The Sundance Kid, Hannibal, we have Scipio. I mean, we have a bunch of characters that are from all points of history in this episode, and it's just so fascinating seeing them all come together, and eventually probably gonna have sit down and have a conversation or go at each other and try to kill each other. It's just a really enjoyable episode, seeing these different characters from throughout history in this one episode. I mean, the Sundance Kid alone, the Sundance Kid being in this fucking episode is just amazing. That's fucking epic. But then you have Hannibal, and then you have Scipio also in the same episode, and these two are kind of like rivals. We see their introduction, the way they act with each other. It's so fucking fascinating. It's that type of series that you can really see that it could be so enjoyable, because even though you know the history of these characters, even though you know what life they lived at the time in history books, you know that their path can choose a different direction now. We know that they can possibly be evil or good because of however the writer intends it to be. I mean, look at Jonah of the Ark. Because of the life she lived, she was constantly a good person, but then she got burned at the stake, and now she's pretty much evil. So if you look at all this, some characters that might have been bad in their life, but then eventually got saved and transported to this world, they might be the good guys. And so that's pretty cool when you think about the ironic situation of the guys that were probably good in the real history timeline might be the evil bad guys, and the guys that were evil, like Nobunaga, for instance, he is someone that's kind of necessarily on the good side. So it's pretty cool when you think about it like that, of who most likely could be our good characters and who could be our villains of the series. Now, enough of that. Let's talk about one thing that really just made me bust a gut, start laughing, and enjoyed this episode. Let's talk about that Hannibal scene with the Sundance Kid on the wagon when they were riding and stuff. When the Sundance Kid pulls out the big fucking gun, you see Hannibal, he's looking to the side, he's like, oh, like the man gets so fucking excited, he's like, oh, give me that, give me that. That's how he acts like, give me that shit, give me that freaking gun right now. It's like, I want to use this to conquer Rome. That shit made me just bust a gut and laugh, just seeing Hannibal act like that. He's like, give me that fucking gun, I want to conquer Rome with it. I had a good laugh with that, just seeing how something like that was added in. It adds a very interesting dynamic with some of the characters, especially with, you know, how Scipio and also Hannibal, you know, the rivals, and the way they interact with each other. It's pretty cool seeing these guys kind of on the same side, and how much they truly respect each other. I mean, you saw it in this episode, when Hannibal was being made fun of, they were just shitting on him because he's the old man that pissed himself. Everybody was making making fun of him. But then you had Scipio, he stood up for him. Even though they're rivals, they're on the opposite sides, he still respects him enough, and he's like, you shouldn't do shit like this, you shouldn't put this man down. So because of that, you get to see the respect between these two characters, and it just shows you that these two characters, even though they were enemies, they still have all this respect. Now let's talk about one of the other soldiers. Let's talk about, you know, the World War II veteran, the person that was in a plane. That scene, I did not expect to be that good, the way that was displayed in this episode. Like, let's just look at that scene for a second, okay? Let's just look deeper into that scene. The entire city right now, the main point of this episode is a war, okay? The Black King initiating a war and wiping out this entire town and then trying to get the drifters out of this town. That's the whole point. Well, eventually amongst this battle, you had to where a door opened up and a drifter came in, and this drifter came in with a plane. And with this plane, he didn't know what the fuck was going on. It's like, what the hell, where am I? What the fuck are you doing with the dragon, you idiot? And all that. He's going around, flying around. Nobody knows what side he's on. We don't know if he's a good guy or a bad guy. We have no idea at the time. We just know he has a plane. And a plane is pretty fucking powerful when you think about it in a fantasy world. So, everybody's looking at, don't know what side he's on. And as the man's looking around at the battlefield, he sees the entire city just burning. You see people screaming, being burned by dragons. You see people getting hunt down and killed. I mean, it's just a horrible image. And when this man is seeing it, he has this PTSD flashback. He realizes what happened in World War, and he's like, holy fuck, and he just starts going after the dragons and killing everything that's in his path. I like the way that was done. I like that immersion, how, you know, this man, he realizes the horror of what World War is like, you know, people being burned at the fire bombings and stuff, and when he realized that, he just instantly chose his side and started, you know, attacking people. So this guy, you can see that, you know, he might be considered evil in some ways, depending on what side he's on, but at the same time, though, you can understand his point of view and what type of life he had, and also what he was doing for his country. I mean, when you saw his own people getting bombed and he witnessed it, you realize the horror he had to see, and how much that probably fucked him up in the head. So, that scene, one of my favorite scenes of this episode was definitely that PTSD flashback that the man had when it linked with this world right now with how everybody's being burned. Now, speaking of everybody being burned, let's just talk about Jonah the Ark real quick, okay? So this character, she has magic, and this confirms that individual characters, even if they didn't have magic in a historical setting, for instance, like, let's say Nobunaga, for instance, like, if you look at our history, our timeline and stuff with certain people, we know for a fact, you know, magic, they can't use that type of shit. But because this is in a fantasy world and certain things are being added in, we now know that some characters that may have not have had abilities or magic or whatever, do have magic in this anime. They can have it. So we now know someone like, let's say, like another character, another historical figure in the past. Like, I'm just gonna throw random. I'm not saying he's gonna be in the series or not. I'm just throwing it out there. Let's just say Abraham Lincoln, for some reason, he had the power to do something, okay? That would mean that, you know, he has an ability in this. Like, for instance, he may have not had it in the historical, real-life setting, but he might be able to have a power in this world because it's an anime and it's, you know, bringing people where they can possibly have abilities. So, hopefully you understand where I'm going with that. So, certain characters, even if they didn't have anything, they might. So, Jonah the Ark kind of introduces this with her being able to use fire to burn people to the ground, Anastasia being able to freeze people. It's really cool, and it adds an interesting layer to some of the characters, because some of the history we know about some characters, maybe let's say in history books that said they were a witch or something, maybe they might actually have magical abilities. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, so which adds more depth to the overall Black King. And remember, as I mentioned, his flag, if you look closely at the early parts of this episode, you see a cross, and you also see on his hand a crucifixion circle where you would get nailed to the cross. So think about that real quick. Think about that, and you can probably understand that this is probably going to add some really cool shit to the series. So let's move past that. Let's talk about the town burning in general. So the way it was displayed, this series is really trying to showcase that it will not censor a hell of a lot. I mean, I like so far what I have witnessed. I don't see a hell of a lot of censorship, and when there is censorship, it's done in a way that doesn't bug me. It's censorship that's not noticeable unless you're really looking for that censorship. And so, I gotta compliment the animators working on this, the whole production team that's working on Drifters right now. They're doing a very good job with the censorship ship being able to show all this violence, the gore. I was surprised seeing, you know, the people being burned alive and stuff. I just didn't think that something like that would be shown, and the way that was shown, it makes me respect that the series is being handled in a way that's sticking true to the original source. So Drifters episode 3, a very good episode. We get to see some new characters introduced that most likely is going to play a big role in the upcoming episodes of the series, and yeah, fantastic episode. How do you feel about Drifters so far? How do you feel about how a bunch of Drifters are being gathered together to fight the Black King? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. You all have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. Please be safe. Chibi out.